This week in racing, we've got black and gold, in fact, lots of gold, even some tire supplier news, and some rumors of some drivers and teams that may not be in places that you would otherwise expect them to be. And we've also got some negative IndyCar news and a major positive NASCAR story. Opposite day is upon us, folks. Let's get into it. So the first F1 car has been officially revealed, and it is the Haas F1, America's F1 team. And as expected, the car is donned in black and gold, very reminiscent of Team Lotus. That is due to new primary sponsor, Rich Energy. I was not paid to say Rich Energy, but I will say it again. Rich Energy is the sponsor of the Haas F1 car. Mixed feelings on this one. It's not the greatest livery in the entire world. The John Player special kind of vibe doesn't really translate to a modern F1 car, and the new large rear wings look absolutely ridiculous. Hopefully, it races better than it looks. Firestone announced that they will extend their stay in IndyCar racing until the year 2025. This announcement was well received by the drivers and teams. The drivers and teams love Firestone because of the relative reliability they have provided over the last 20 years they've been in charge of IndyCar racing. This was kind of an unprompted announcement by Firestone. In fact, I believe their contract lasted for a couple more years. So Firestone definitely doubling down on their commitment to IndyCar racing and kind of tripling down because they're building a new testing facility in Akron, Ohio. More IndyCar news, and this one's going to have a bit of a negative tinge to it, especially if you're an international viewer. We got some NBC Sports Gold details finally. The base original starting price, it will eventually go up at the start of the season, is $50 for 200 hours of fully produced original content, as well as race replays and practice and qualifying sessions. Now, that being said, this is only exclusive to United States buyers. No international distribution for the NBC Sports Gold app. So, translating, if you're international, you're probably not going to have a very easy time of watching IndyCar racing this year. And finally, the rumor mill has kind of sped up a bit for the WEC, particularly around the GTE Pro class and BMW. There's rumors that at the end of the super season at Le Mans this year, BMW will pull their effort out of the World Endurance Championship, and couple that with the fact that Ford may be shuttering their GTE program at a factory level. That leaves the GTE Pro category on fairly shaky grounds for the 2019-2020 season for the World Endurance Championship. I mentioned in my Daytona Rolex 24 debut review that there may be some problems in paradise with the GTE category, and it looks like that's beginning to come true. And now to one of our big stories, and it involves Pato O'Ward, the Mexican Indy Lights champion. He is not at preseason testing in Laguna Seca, but his team and teammate Colton Herta and Harding-Stienbrenner Racing are at spring training for the NTT Data IndyCar Series out at Laguna Seca. And there have been rumors flying around for about a week now, maybe a little bit longer, that there are some serious funding problems over at the Harding-Stienbrenner Racing team. Pato O'Ward only has $1 million of funding to his name to bring to the team, and that comes from his Indy Lights Championship. So there's some serious doubts that Pato O'Ward will run more than a couple, maybe 3 races this season for Harding-Stienbrenner Racing unless they can find a sponsor. And of course, this late in the game, sponsorships are hard to come by. And this is certainly not positive news to think that a driver of Pato O'Ward's talent, and if you watch the Race of Champions, or even if you watched Sonoma this year, or if you watched any Indy Lights races, or you go even further back to the Rolex 24 last year when he put an Orica Gibson up into the top 4 overall in qualifying, you would know that Pato O'Ward is the real deal. And I think personally, if he's given the time to develop, he could develop into one of the generational talents, kind of like an Alexander Rossi, or you go further back to like an Alex Zanardi or a Michael Andretti. I think he's got that potential. He's really just that good. And the fact that he's not going to be on the grid theoretically for an entire season, again, we don't know. The Harding-Stienbrenner Racing team, kind of since they made that Honda announcement, have been kind of quiet because there hasn't been a whole lot coming out, and we've seen team livery reveals, we've seen all this and that from many of the teams, but not from this team. A lot of people talking about a divorce with Mike Harding, one of the co-owners. I thought that the marriage had been saved, but apparently not. There's rumors about that. Why does that factor into things? Well, of course, I don't need to go into divorce law, but naturally, when someone gets divorced, usually, certain assets are split amongst both parties, and generally speaking, you don't necessarily have the budget to run an IndyCar program if you are going through the middle of a divorce, and especially if you're someone who also runs a construction business, on the side, or not on the side. It's kind of his main primary source of income. So really, the whole team is relying on George Michael Steinbrenner IV, and really. And a lot of people have asked this question, well, why is Herta getting to go to Laguna Seca, and it looks like he's going to run the full season? Well, it's very simple. George Steinbrenner and Colton Herta have been friends since childhood. They've come up through the road to Indy together, and their goal was to get to IndyCar. They've done that. And Pato O'Ward is kind of someone who was brought in, and this is not to say that he's an unwelcome addition. I'm sure if you asked Colton Herta or George Steinbrenner or even Mike Harding, they would probably say, well, absolutely, we love to have Pato O'Ward on the team. But unfortunately, when you get down to brass tacks, O'Ward is kind of the guy that gets caught out because, yes, he's the Indy Lights champion, but he's only got that $1 million. It's not like he's got a big sponsor behind him as well as that $1 million purse. So the Steinbrenners haven't been able to go out and find sponsorship, and I don't blame them necessarily for that. I mean, it's a tough market, but because of that, Pato O'Ward is sitting on the sidelines, or theoretically is going to sit on the sidelines. We've seen in the past with drivers who are on this limited kind of Indy Light schedule. We saw Kyle Kaiser last year, and a couple years before that, we saw like Spencer Pigot. They will get maximum 3 races depending on how and where they spend their money. You've got to assume one of the races that Pato is absolutely going to do is the Indianapolis 500. But outside of that, assuming there's no sponsorship, maybe he does St. Pete and race 2 at COTA, I think it is. So maybe St. Pete and COTA, and then they do Indianapolis, or maybe they do St. Pete and the Indy GP and Indianapolis, assuming funding doesn't come. But again, it's a shame because, O'Ward is the guy, one of the guys that you really want to see and see how he will develop, how he'll stack up against the field. And doesn't look like it's going to happen. There's also been, there's so many rumors coming around the Harding Racing team right now, but there's another rumor that maybe they only have one Honda engine lease for the full season, and that would be a bit of a shock considering how hard Honda lobbied to get them in the first place. But I figured I'd put it out there because it's being kind of spread around. But again, hopefully this gets sorted out at some point, and we get to see Pato O'Ward on the grid because, like I said, the guy has a lot of talent, and he's going to be very exciting when he gets on the track this year. And the Daytona 500 entry list was released this week, and positive news. It's over 40 cars. There will be cars going home in the Daytona Duels. 42 cars on the entry list for this year's Daytona 500. That's up from last year at this time when there were only 39 cars on the entry list. It didn't even look like there was going to be a full field at this point last year, and then BK Racing showed up literally the day before, the day of qualifying. They got in the show, and the Daytona 500 had a full field of 40 cars. Of course, a full field is only an arbitrary kind of measurement, because if you'll remember, NASCAR reduced the size of what is considered a full field from 43 down to 40 for the Cup Series. Some notable folks on this list. Now, naturally, you're going to get a more detailed look at all the 42 entrants in the Bandwagoners Guide that will be coming up very shortly for the Daytona 500, but I'll name a few or three names that kind of stood out to me as kind of interesting. We've got Casey Mears making his return with Germain Racing. That will be car number 27. Teammates, of course, with Ty Dillon. Germain Racing, of course, the team that fired Casey Mears to bring Ty Dillon in, and now they'll be teammates. Casey Mears, is he, going to be winning the race? Probably not. He's going to be, struggling to get in the field probably. Then again, it's an RCR car, more than likely. So we know how strong those cars were in the last year's Daytona 500, so who knows? Ryan Truex, brother of Martin. I can't remember if he's ever made a Cup start before this. Maybe his first Cup start. No, it's not. That is a bad mistake because I think he ran like the entire 2014 season for BK Racing. Stupid David. But yeah, it's his first Cup start in an awfully long time. He's going to be rolling off for Tommy Baldwin Racing, which is also making a comeback, so good for them. And also Parker Kligerman is in the ride that we normally associate with DJ Kennington in this race, the 96 for Gaunt Brothers Racing. So it's good from the perspective of NASCAR not having to spin any PR this year. The duels are going to be worth watching, though I'm going to go off on a little bit of tangent here. It's a bit unfortunate that the duels only penalize the small teams. I mean, they're literally set up that two small teams are guaranteed to go home. There's no real risk of any of the charter teams missing the show unless their driver gets injured or something because of the, how the charter system works. So from that perspective, you'd almost think, why not just start 42 teams? Because if missing the biggest race in NASCAR hurts a big team with a big sponsor, what happens with a small team and a small sponsor? Who knows? I mean, smarter people than I guess, have thought of this, but I don't know. It's kind of weird that they reduced the field size because I guess if they still had a 43 car full field, they would have been 3 short last year and they'd be 1 short this year. But from a health of the sport perspective, and this is going to sound weird because people will say, well, David, you're such a staunch supporter of Bump Day. Well, yeah, that's because no cars are locked into the show. It's a fair, egalitarian style of going about things, as fair as it possibly can be anyway. And here you've got the deck completely stacked against the small teams. So you've got whatever it is, 6 small teams, and 2 of those are going home. I don't know. I don't know if, and they're guaranteed to go home. It's not like Alex Bowman is going to miss the show. He's locked in whatever happens to him or Kyle Busch or whoever. Now, of course, people will make the argument that, well, of course they should be locked in. They're the big stars. Then what's the point of watching the duels? I mean, just to watch, 6 guys wreck in the back. I don't know. Denny Hamlin certainly doesn't like the meaningless guys in the back wrecking. But regardless, this is actually good news. I don't want to put too much of a negative spin on this because, again, seeing car counts go up for a big race, especially when they've slumped significantly, especially last year, it's a good sign. Now, that being said, there were also some teams that said they were coming to Daytona and then didn't come to Daytona. I think the entry list was looking like it was going to be 44 or 45 cars, and then it shrunk all the way down to 42. Yeah, that was a bit weird. There were definitely some announcements made that didn't end up following through. But it's going to be worth watching Speed Weeks, especially the duels this year. So I'm happy for that because the duels were kind of a joke last year. It just was kind of an excuse to tear up cars. This time, at least the cars getting torn up are teams that are probably already in bankruptcy. Fantastic. So that was This Week in Racing. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. Let me know down in the comments if you have any thoughts on any of the stories today, or maybe something that I missed and you want to talk about. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport content, and we'll see you in the next video.